Before we start our actual discussion, I want to check in with you. When did we start planning the show?
Wow. Back in June, like maybe it was May.
You're listening to Wit and Reason, and I'm Dr. Alexis. With a warning before we continue on with this show, because it does include mature content. So save the show on your Apple or Google podcast, Spotify, or YouTube to listen in when little ones aren't around. Because on today's show, we will be answering the question, what is a healthy sex drive? You can also bookmark this show page at witandreason.com/healthysex to access it and our other resources another time. We have taken extra time and care, months, to make sure we bring you an educational and tactful show about sex. Our Wit and Reason therapist, Rueben Steele and I dive into drive. What's too high, too low, and even debate a bit about what's considered a diagnosable psychological psychiatric disorder. Reuben refers to the International Classification of Diseases, 11th revision, a diagnostic health tool created by the World Health Organization, while I refer to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, created by the American Psychiatric Association. And instead of getting too nerdy here, you can find a list of clickable clinical considerations for sex addiction and compulsive behavioral disorders. What is a healthy sex drive is a tricky subject. Now, violating the rights of others is clearly harmful and unacceptable. But we're not here to characterize levels or brands of sexuality as pathological or bad. Instead, when it comes to your healthy sex drive, we would like for you to use this show as a guide to help you increase your ability to figure out what's healthy, sexy, and compatible for you.
Welcome to Wit and Reason, hosted by psychologist Dr. Alexis Moreno. Dr. Moreno brings her expertise to providing smart and practical explanations on human behavior. Listen now as Dr. Moreno brings a little bit of positive mental health to your day.
Our outline for this show, what is a healthy sex drive? This happened before the monumental, historic Roe versus Wade overturned by the Supreme Court, which is about abortion rights and healthcare rights, reproductive rights, and it is now also associated with our sex life. Right? Or at least with the sex life and potentially the sex drives of those individuals who could be at risk for having an unwanted pregnancy.
Right.
So I was wondering if we could throw in there this reality that we're all facing now, how even societal, political, legal issues can creep their way into our minds and sex drive. As well, and how that might be impacting people today.
That's a big major decision, right? It has some serious implications, right? People have the discussion about sex and sexuality and sex drive more openly, candidly than before. People are talking about sex more than before, maybe. It has some significant implications, though, no doubt.
Right. So on today's show, what is a healthy sex drive? We're going to be defining what is a sex drive. A lot of people are always curious, like, is this normal? Am I normal? Is my sex drive normal? So we're going to be talking about that as well. I used to teach sex ed. And the thing we used to tell the teens is that, like, you know what, there is no quote unquote safe sex, right? Sex is always going to have risks involved. So we will talk about what are the healthiest steps you could take to engage in sex and intimacy and nurturing your sex drive. That's something you're interested in doing. What's the safest and healthiest way you could go about doing that? And then Reuben has provided us with so many wonderful resources as well that we'll have on our webpage on witandreason.com, DC Radio. So Reuben, tell us, how would you define, or how have you heard sex drive defined, at least clinically speaking, professionally speaking?
Yeah, so kind of on a basic level, just for most people in general, or layman's terms before we go clinically, it's just a person's desire to engage in or participate in sexual activity. And so that desire can fluctuate from person to person, but beyond just the sex drive itself. So in a broad context, I want to look at overall like sexual satisfaction, right? So somebody could have a very high sex drive and be engaging in sexual activity quite frequently, but the satisfaction of their sexual life may still be low, right? And so that's kind of one indicator of the frequency in terms of the drive itself, but ultimately looking at what's the overall sexual satisfaction? Is it mutually pleasing? Are the couple having conversation about sex? Is there respect during sex? And the broader umbrella of intimacy in general. So not just the sexual act itself, but also broadly speaking in terms of what's the health of the overall intimacy of the couple, emotional and physical.
Yeah. And so when we're talking sex drive, it's almost like a two-pronged consideration. There's the frequency, almost like quantity, and quality.
Right. Exactly.
Of sexual encounters or sexual interest.
Right.
Now the big question that we get from a lot of people is like, okay, am I normal? What's healthy? What's a healthy sex drive, right? So if we're talking about like, okay, we're looking at quality and quantity, what's too much? What's too little? I mean, how do you help people navigate that?
Yeah. So some of the experts in the field, they kind of give people a number. People are actually like, we want a number. A pretty kind of broad range from like once a week to once every 30 days. That's a pretty big window. And then anywhere in kind of in between. But also it kind of comes back to what does that couple or couples, like, how do they feel about it? Like, are they okay with once a month and completely satisfied? And so many variables too, right, go into that. Age, health, stress, location, years you've been together, so many variables can affect a sex drive. But ultimately, if we're looking at numbers, we're looking at once a week. And
so who deems what's a healthy number and what's not? Is this like a CDC or
yes, actually
association determination or?
Yeah, I don't think it's that's a good question. I don't think it's an actual organization. I think it's kind of independent studies that's been done by various experts in the field of sexology or sex therapists. I think there was a study done in 2019, and from that study they determined once a week was kind of the average in terms of for most couples in satisfaction. Same with like the once a month. But I don't think it's kind of hard just to put a number on it, right? Because the variables in each couple is different and likes and preferences are different. That's why they kind of lean with overall what's the satisfaction. And is the couple having conversations about the quality of sex and their interests and preferences to really determine and identify and define what's normal for them.
Yeah. And I appreciate you mentioning that, like, it's really going to be a case by case, so even if we do research on, okay, what's the average for people? There is that spectrum, right? There is people who just have a lower sex drive, and then people who have a higher sex drive, and then everyone who kind of fluctuates in the middle, and that's going to ebb and flow depending on what in the world is going on in your life or in the world or in the environment, what stressors you got going on. And so that's always really important to keep into consideration when someone's kind of doing a self check-in or even a relationship check-in on with what's healthy is going to be a case by case. Right. At least when we look at like clinical diagnosis, what we deem as some kind of psychological condition or disorder, the key factor that needs to be involved for it to be technically unhealthy or a disorder or an impairment would be an impairment in functioning, right? So that seems to tie into what you're mentioning about like the satisfaction, hey, if it's less than once a month, but you're satisfied and you have a healthy, open relationship, and that's cool, that works for you all, then no problems. However, if your sex drive is low and it's impairing your functioning of what you want, what will give you a quality life, like engaging in sex more frequently, then we have a mismatch there, right? And so that's really what we're looking at here when we're trying to figure out but really it's about figuring out, okay, what's working for you and what's not. Right. Yep. And then since we're talking about intimate experiences with other human beings, then we also have to consider the other person's wants and preferences.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
So How do you work with individuals or couples, let's say, who are on the low end of the sex drive, and it's something that's incongruent with what their partner may want or prefer? Let's talk first about one has a higher and one has a lower.
Okay.
And then we'll break down scenarios for our listeners here, if that's
okay. Yeah. So it would really be exploring in terms of just getting curious about, like, what is that about? Because there's so many variables that could impact that. So really trying to understand and pinpoint, like, what is at the root or contributing factors to that lower libido. Is it an emotional kind of blockage, right? So one partner doesn't feel emotionally safe, right? Or doesn't feel comfortable. Or one partner may have a body image issue. So there's some insecurities, like they don't really feel comfortable in that regard. And so there's less likely to kind of want to engage because, you know, kind of reminds them of what they don't like about themselves. So really trying to pinpoint exactly what it is, or it could just be weight gain, or just another variety of reasons, or it could be a health factor, or it could be a mental health factor. It could be somebody who's struggling with depression and just doesn't have an interest and just a low desire or no desire. So we're trying to find out what exactly is the challenge or the issue. And then from there, trying to find out, is there ways to increase the sex drive, especially if that person isn't satisfied. Like they used to have a higher sex drive and then now it took a nosedive. They really wanted to kind of get back to where it was or even higher. Now it gets a little challenging if the person, like one person is content with, hey, I'm good where I'm at, right? With this low sex drive, I'm fine if once a month is good for me. And another person's like, wait a minute, I need at least once a week or multiple times a week kind of thing. So that's when it gets a little more dicey. But then kind of looking at, you know, from the standpoint of what can you do, being willing to step out of the comfort zone and saying, okay, I may not have a high sex drive or engage as much as the other partner wants to, but because I know it's important for that person, I'm willing to make myself available in terms of connecting that way. In terms of kind of moving more towards the middle if two are kind of at opposite ends.
Yeah. So it sounds like maybe like some compromise going on there. And whatever person decides to engage in, we want to make sure that they're doing so because that is within their comfort and ability versus feeling forced or pressured or coerced.
Yes.
You're engaging anything sexually. Right?
Yeah, those are not healthy for a relationship in terms of when there's coercion or pressure or feeling forced.
Yeah.
We want the person to feel respected and willingly of their own volition to engage.
Yeah, because that'll kill a sex drive for sure. Or that'll kill like sexual interest.
It's gonna kill a lot, right? In relationship too, right?
Okay, so we talked about like the couple who's navigating, you know, maybe one person is in a lower sex drive experience, the other person's in a higher, and that's an issue for them.
Before you go to that one, I just want to also add this piece too. So let's say there's a person who, I don't know, they're just really charged. This is a high energy person, right? Looking for other like non-sexual ways to kind of discharge some of the energy, right?
Yeah.
And so it may not be realistic for a person who just, whatever reason, they're just driving just lower. They just kind of have the wire that way. Is there still a way for that person physically to do something with the partner or another way to kind of get out some of that energy as well to create more of a balance?
Yeah. And I was also kind of curious about the label need in your professional expertise, and I'll share my thoughts around it too. Is like, how do you navigate this label of need when it comes to sex?
Yeah. So I like the word preference. I mean, need is strong, right? And so like food.
I need water.
We need water.
To survive.
We need food. Right? I need clothes. All right.
Yeah, I need physical movement. I need engagement.
A person will not physically die like without sexual activity, right?
Right.
But it's important. So because it does have a high importance, I think that's where the word kind of need comes in, right? Depending upon the person. I like to think of it as a high preference, a little below need. I don't know what that word would be. But
I guess high preference.
Yeah, a high preference, maybe borderline on need, because it just feels, it can be like a strong drive, right? There's a strong biological drive and urge, which makes it feel like it's a must have, right? But many people, you know, currently are surviving. They're not connecting in any sexual manner, and they're okay from a physical standpoint, even emotional standpoint as well. Yeah. So I kind of look at it as more of a high preference, high preference. So
for some people, and then for other people, it could be like a low preference or like a.
Or some people still feel like, hey, it's really a need, right? Some people really kind of, in their mind, they feel like it's that important that it's to them a need, you know.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that language, especially if someone has a lower sex drive and then their partner's, you know, describing it as a need, it could that's where like it could feel a little bit more pressured of like, oh my gosh, if I'm not like giving my partner like what they need, like it feels like dire and like urgent and an emergency, and it's like maybe we should you know, like kind of keep that part in check. It's a very strong preference. Now let's talk about what if someone's high preference for a high frequency and high quality sex life is just completely incongruent with their partner, and the partner's not down to meet that or can't meet that. How do you navigate those really high sex drives? And then we could start talking about like compulsions and whether or not sex is an actual like addiction.
With the person that has a high sex need, really try to understand, right, that person's view on sexuality and sexuality in the context of the relationship. From a stereotypical standpoint, guys just want to hit it, quit it, thank you, ma'am, and it's purely physical, right? And that's kind of a default, like what comes to mind when it's primarily a guy, and that could be a woman too. Women have high sex drive as well, of course. But looking at what's driving that drive, is it the desire for closeness, right? It's a desire just to connect. Some people are just touchy-feely, and that's their love language. And so the more they connect emotionally and physically, the more bonded they feel with that person. And that's just kind of like their love language. Is it purely physical from a standpoint of pleasure seeking, in terms of they just love the pleasure aspect of connecting with their partner sexually? So really trying to understand like what's driving that need, or if it's just they're just a horny person. They're just wired for high drive. I just need a lot of sex because that's kind of how I am. But are there other factors contributing to that? Which compulsion could be a part of that? Is there some pornography involved that's kind of fueling some of this? So really trying to understand that, and then really talk through, well, is there a way to meet some of those quote unquote needs or high preferences, but in a different way? So yes, you may want sex, I don't know, let's say twice a day, 6 days a week, right? Like that's a really that's a lot for some people, right? Yeah. Okay, is there a way to lower that bar somewhat, but still have some of those high preferences still met, even though at that level, it's just not possible or feasible given where your partner is? So is there a way for room to kind of, let's bring that down, but still find ways to meet it? So really kind of talking it through with that person, with the partner, getting his or her feedback on their situation, on their partner's high preference needs, talking that through and seeing if there's room for some solutions and some bargaining. And then also non-sexual intimacy as well, like how much of that is also happening. So not just the actual physical sexual, but what about non-sexual physical intimacy?
Yeah.
Hand holding, touching, kissing, caressing, you know, those kind of things. How much of that is happening? And can that fill some of this high preference need, even though it's not always sexual?
It's almost like trying to chase after something that's not really resolving what the actual need is, like human connection and the intimacy, bonding and attachment. When you mentioned the 2 times a day, in my mind, it popped up like those news reports about people losing their jobs over viewing pornography and masturbating while at work or during meetings, you know? Yeah. And so when we talk about like, yes, there is a range, some are going to be higher than others. And if there's some kind of behavioral compulsion that is interfering with your other responsibilities in life, like work, then that's going to be problematic. And that's more along the lines of some kind of clinical disorder, possibly.
Right. Yeah, so actually the ICD-11 has actually added sexual compulsive behavior disorder under the impulse disorder section, just from what you just mentioned in terms of the impact on a person's functioning and the compulsion. So the compulsion is there's this strong urge, desire, along with obsession in terms of thinking about it, fantasizing, et cetera, causes distress to the person. So they don't want to engage in certain behaviors, but they feel like this urge and they're compelled to do certain things, right? For either a longer period of time, or they're engaging in higher kind of risk behaviors. but it's causing distress. It's affecting their relationships. They're missing time from work. They're missing times on responsibilities, on social outings. Hey, you're supposed to meet up with some friends and go play top golf. And, you know, where's John? Is supposed to be here like an hour ago, and he's in the basement looking, right? And so how it manifests in terms of on the other side of it, where it's not healthy and it's distressing, and the person wants to stop, has tried to stop and just can't, right?
Yeah.
Kind of indications of kind of a clinical condition.
The general population, and then like, I guess, professionals in this area have been kind of struggling to navigate the question around sex addiction. Is that like a real thing?
Right.
And it's come to the conclusion where the issue is like withdrawal. Does your brain experience and your body experience like a physiological reaction to detoxing from sex? Mm-hmm. And they weren't able to find that, but they are still experiencing clients who are coming in saying, hey, I have this issue with not engaging in these types of behaviors. We have a whole process that our profession goes through to identify what is an actual mental health disorder or condition. And then once we all do all the research and then come to some kind of consensus and then write it up, we put it in this book. And then that's where all the mental health professionals use to guide their diagnosing and then also billing for like insurance and stuff for treatment, right? So sexual compulsion is more like a behavioral compulsion, not necessarily like a substance addiction that someone would experience from like trying to get off of like meth, right? Or like alcoholism or...
Yeah, there are some people in terms of in the field, right, who do believe that it is an addiction and that there is a withdrawal component.
Yeah.
And that's likened, at least pornography and quote unquote porn addiction to like substance use, right, in terms of the effect on the brain, in terms of the reward system, the circuitry within the brain, and the chemicals that are released. From doing that, and then the withdrawal. So some people said it includes like headaches, restlessness, agitation, fatigue, even depression, right? So I guess it depends on what source you're kind of referring to or what author or researcher. But yeah, definitely a lot of debate still going on whether it's actual addiction or not.
Yeah, and so right now, how have they labeled it?
Well, I guess they're probably going with the ICD version of sexual compulsive disorder, but some people are saying it's an addiction, right? Like Patrick Carnes, you just say, hey, this is sexual addiction. So I guess it's to each clinician's, I guess,
still up for debate.
Still up for debate.
Yeah. And it also, I mean, like what also comes into that category is like I'm using air quotes here because it's still like a TBD, but addiction to like social media or to gaming or to, even gambling is considered like a more of a behavioral compulsion versus like the substance induced addiction. Right. So there are still a lot of other like behavioral experiences that people have where it does become more compulsive, and either way, it's messing with their life. So right now we're still just kind of like picking apart the language here. It is recognized though that people do experience a lot of challenges around it. I think the thing to kind of be really mindful of in relationships is that, I hear people using this label like, oh, well, I have a sex addiction. And so you just need to be cool with all the affairs I'm having and the STDs I gave you.
No.
So that's where it's worth saying, like, regardless of what kind of label we want to give it, even when it comes down to like mental health conditions and disorders, there's still a responsibility of behaviors and decisions that are being made. It may be more challenging for some versus others, but there's still a level of free will and responsibility around that one.
Absolutely. Great point. Yeah. Definitely have to take responsibility, and the impact, like you said, the impact on relationships is significant, and how it can be detrimental to relationships. So if somebody feel like they have something like that, definitely should seek professional help.
Yes.
Because it's something that they probably have tried to stop on their own and can't, right? And so that's another sign of, hey, maybe I need to get some additional support and help around this issue.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if you're saying it's so challenging, then seek proper support. So let's go ahead and talk about what those resources are. Any recommendations on like either side. I mean, if people are struggling with the high and they want to calm it down a bit, or if they're on the low and they want to boost it up a bit, what do you got for us?
So on some basic in terms of what you can like do immediately, right? If you kind of want to boost it up, is look at reducing your stress levels, right? Increasing exercise, improving diet, right?
Classic. It's a classic 3.
Those are the classic 3, right?
Tell us what's going on in your life. Do these 3 things.
Do these 3 things, and that'll take over, right? But also some novelty. Depends on how long a person has been together, a couple, right? Yeah. People can kind of fall into a rut, just like anything. Kind of fall into a rut, kind of get mundane. So just maybe trying a new like position, or just trying something. Talk about something you know may have had a fantasy about and never really expressed, or change the location, or try a different scent, or just something that you haven't done, and see if that kind of adds a little spark, a little.
So when you say try a different scent, are you talking about like spray some Febreze around the room, or
that, or perfume, cologne, candles?
Candles, yeah, they got the massage candles too.
Massage, people try massage, right? Start with that. Start with some kind of some slow buildups, or start early in the day too, right? So of course, there's the acts itself, right? But oftentimes it starts earlier than that. Kind of, start in the morning, kind of build up some anticipation around kind of connecting in the intimate way later on that day or evening or what have you, right? And so, or maybe it's an outfit, maybe it's a attire,
It's definitely a very sensory experience, So even, I mean, we always talk about mindfulness. Practicing that mindfulness of being very present throughout your day and recognizing your various sensory experiences, and then especially like leading up to any kind of like sexual activity, being very mindful and present and one in that space versus your mind traveling like, oh man, the dishes in the sink, or, like Supreme Court signaling my rights, or where's the kids, like that's
what's going on, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I like that. You can kind of be mindful before, right? That's good. Yeah.
So we have some more resources for you, a bunch of them on our website on witandreason.com. But thank you so much, Reuben, for sharing your time and your expertise with us today.
You're welcome. Glad to be here. Glad to be a part of it.
Thank you.
From DC Radio, this is Wit and Reason, and I'm Dr. Alexis. You can visit witandreason.com/healthysex to access a variety of healthy sex drive resources Reuben and I put together for you. We have this show and all of our past mental health and wellness shows up on witandreason.com/DC Radio and soundcloud.com/DC Radio HD. And because our mission is to make mental health and wellness much more accessible, you can now subscribe to Wit and Reason on iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, and of course, along with Apple Podcasts and YouTube. Or you can follow us on pretty much any social media platform for clips of our show at Wit and Reason. Let's keep the conversation going.